Alrighty. So, anyone who's looking for the previous ones that I did, um, they didn't really flow too well. I had to stop and get my train of thought, and this is my second night of doing this, and I'm just starting to get the hang of it, so I went ahead and deleted those for the sake of quality over quantity. But this is Pillow Talk with Alan Haig. I originally wanted to call it Disco Internal and do an intro with Burn Baby Burn going on in the background. And then I listened back to myself and I heard how monotone I am. And I was like, yeah, that could definitely put me to sleep. So, for this one, I wanted to tell a personal story, and this one basically revolves around the expression, pick your hill to die on. Now, if you've never heard that expression, well, you have now. Basically, it means you need to pick your moments of conflict carefully and make them mean something. Because, as with anything, the more often you do it, the less meaning it has. And I've found that, especially with social media just being a hotbed for people getting into arguments and wanting to cut each other's throats, that, we're bombarded with situations where we can either let it go or take issue with it. And for most of the time, I ask myself, is this worth getting upset over? Because if you get upset frequently, it's going to take its toll on you. If you get angry a lot, it's going to take its toll on you. And other people are going to see that about you. But if you are the type of person who usually lets things slide, is very forgiving, and not quick to get into an altercation, then when you do, it actually means a lot more, and people will take note of it. So, what I'm about to tell you can apply to your career, your love life, your friendships, especially, your interpersonal relationships, because you don't want to have a lot of fights in those. But so at the job I'm working at now, when you first start, it takes a long time to get good at what we do. So you basically don't have any pull. And the shift I was on had a lead there who had been there for 20 years, and he had a lot of pull. And, whether it's his own unhappiness or his ego or his need to feel superior or, his insecurity about his position and some young guys coming in to take his spot, he would give new guys a hard time, not directly, but every little thing that they did wrong, he would lecture them and, make them feel inferior. Now, I've been in this situation before, and when you don't have any pull at the company you work for, the best route is not to have an altercation or tell him to F off or anything like that when he's, berating you. I just smile, say, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I take it in stride. But as I spent more time there, and I got better, and I kind of had more responsibility, he would still continue to do that. And it got to the point where I was given a project that people had worked on in the past, but no one had ever figured out how to make it work. And it was given to me by my supervisor, who is above the lead. The lead is just, the head of that department, but the supervisor oversees all the departments, and he says, I want you to figure out how to make this work. And I said, okay. And so I start working on it, and this guy's eyeballing me the entire time. And he goes, he asked me if I'm doing exactly what I'm doing, and I tell him yes. The supervisor asked me to do it, and he said, we spent so much time in the past trying to figure out how to make this work. Thousands of hours, which is obviously an exaggeration, because if you spend 1,000 hours doing something, and if you get to 1,000 hours and you haven't figured it out, I don't know about your decision-making skills, but basically he wanted to shut it down right then and there. And I told him, look, go talk to the supervisor. And he said, supervisor told me just keep doing what you're doing. So I present my method to him. I got it to work. I had gone to all the various departments, figure out how I was going to make it work. And he said, okay, as soon as the plant supervisor comes back next week, we will let him know. And I was like, am I going to be included in that meeting? And he said, oh yes, of course. This is the supervisor. Plant manager comes back, and randomly, one day I hadn't heard anything, he walks up to the lead, who is then doing the exact thing I figured out how to do. And he asks him, how is it going? And he goes, oh, it's good. We're almost there. And I thought, oh, this motherfucker just spent all this time telling me this couldn't be done, and then slid in and started working on it or taking the credit for it. And the supervisor tells me, I tell the supervisor, he's like, yeah, I know, he's a real piece of work, huh? And I was like, what about that meeting we were supposed to have? And he said, well, we ended up getting caught up, and the lead, Alex is his name, the lead. Alex talked to Marcus, and, Marcus just told him to go ahead with it. Now, at this point, I could have gotten upset, but I took it in stride and said, okay. And I continued doing projects that were asked of me, with the hopes that come review time, it would pay off for me. Because if I had taken all of this crap, he would have taken note of that. And so I keep stepping up, taking on more responsibility than I should. In the back of my head, I'm keeping that there. And these things are starting to mount up. Just the treatment and the undermining, but I save it. And it finally comes time to review time, and I had previously asked him, is this going to be worth my time? I asked the supervisor, and he said, oh yeah, I always reward people who step up and go the extra mile. And I said, okay. And then I kept that in the back of my head. Review time comes, and what he offers me is insultingly low. And I said, that doesn't match up with what you told me about rewarding people and, basically making sure that people's efforts don't go wasted. And he says, well, I mean, there's only so much to give out, and I gave you more than I could give other people. And I said, other people have no bearing on this. This is where I picked my hill to die on. I said, no, I don't accept that. Because what you offer me for what I do for you should have nothing to do with what you have to pay other people. Okay? In this country, if you don't have any money, you still have debt, and you still owe people. And as far as I'm concerned, if I'm going to continue to do this, you owe me. And I'm not going to accept that. Because I've been performing at a level above my pay grade for quite some time. And he said, I understand, it's just out of my hands. And I was like, well then, that's off my table. And because I had never taken issue up to that point, and because I had taken all this shit, because I picked the right moment to put my foot down, and it was observed other times that I kept my mouth shut. He came back to me, I don't know, a couple days later, and he said, okay, I'm going to give you a large bonus. He didn't say large bonus, but it was large. And if I had thrown a fit prior to that, and if I had, gotten into an altercation, the finger could have been pointed at me. And they could have said, well, your attitude lately really hasn't been that great. No, I didn't give them the opportunity. Because when you pick those moments right, the blame can't be shifted to you in the way you've handled things. That's another thing that's important, is that even if someone wrongs you, or something's unjust, if you don't handle it in exactly the right way, if you give somebody any reason to discredit you, that will be used against you. And people will point to that moment and say, well, we did this, but you did this, and so. But when you pick those moments right, and when you know when to put your foot down, you can really make it count. So I want you to think about, how often do I get into these situations where, it's a confrontational fight or flight? And how often do I fight and how often do I flight? And maybe think about how you can be more effective with that, with your job, with your relationships, with your friendships. Just think about, is this worth getting upset about? Am I really going to affect any change by taking issue with this? Or can I let this slide? And if you can, then I would recommend that you do. Because after doing this for a long time, I rarely get angry. And I find that I'm really easily forgiving. And maybe the same can happen for you if you just pick those moments right. All right.